Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this information session. My name is Paul McAllister. I'm a project manager here at the City of Melville. The information session this afternoon will be presenting the results of surveys that we have conducted over the last 12 months, both online and face-to-face at Deepwater Point. The surveys will inform the development of a parking management plan for Deepwater Point. Before I introduce the panel, I'd like to do the welcome to country. This is an acknowledgement to country. The City of Melville acknowledges the Bibbulmun people as the traditional owners of the land on which the city stands today, and pays its respects to the Whadjuk people and elders both past and present. In the room today, as part of the information session, we have Mick McCarthy, who's the Director of Technical Services. We have Kimberly Broadstro, our Manager Engineering. We have Jacob Martin from Cardinal, who is responsible for putting this presentation together and will be facilitating the process. We have Joey Ball and Sarah Brown, who are the technical support for this afternoon. Before we start the information session, we'd like to get to know who we're speaking with this afternoon. And we have a little survey. A little interactive poll, which will appear on your screen shortly. I think we have 3 questions we'd like you to fill in. It'll give us an idea of who we're speaking to. The first question is, how are you feeling today? You've got multiple choices, and we'd like you to check one of the boxes, please. Our second question is, which suburb do you live in? And our final question is, I think everyone is participating and voting. And the last question we have is, third question we have is your age group. And our final question, which is really quite relevant, is what do you do mostly when you visit Deepwater Point Reserve? And we'll be calculating the responses and we'll show you the results just shortly. Right. Well, the majority of people are quite curious. Some of us are happy. Some of us are skeptical. And it's good to see that 17% of us are positive. The majority of participants today are from the Applecross, Mount Pleasant and Brentwood area. We've got some residents from Bateman, Cardinia and Murdoch. And the majority of people today are in the 65 plus age group. We like to visit the cafe, We go for exercise and, of course, social gathering. So that's it gives me a good idea of who's here today, the demographic, and the reason for visiting Deepwater Point. Thank you for participating in that little poll. And now we will move on to the purpose of the consultation. The purpose of the consultation, as I said, we've done over the last 12 months to engage with people most likely to use the site, to develop a draft parking management plan in ways that are open, transparent, and with the outcomes that can be clearly linked to the engagement process. Now, this is your opportunity to have input on the online survey, and the interactive map has informed us, to hear from the project team at the City of Melville and Cardno, and to ask questions through the question and answer box throughout the presentation. Now, I would like to hand over now to Jacob from Cardno. Jacob will facilitate the process. The city appointed Cardno WA as an independent traffic consultant, and I'll hand over now to Jacob to facilitate the presentation.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Jacob Martin. I'm from Cardno, as Paul has introduced. So today I'm going to talk about the information that we've received back from the local residents and all the people who responded to the survey. I'll present some information that we gathered from parking surveys and some discussion about how the current Deepwater Point car park and the surrounds work. And I'll be available to answer questions about generally how different opportunities might arise, and basically be here to answer any questions you might have about what we might do in the future. So the first section is trying to provide some feedback on the information that we received back from a variety of avenues, but predominantly, in this case, the surveys. And you can see from this, these icons that we had a wide range of different avenues to receive information back, including direct emails, access through the Melville Talks website. We went out on site and asked across 2 different days, a group of people through intercept surveys, trying to spread around a series of questions to ask how people currently use Deepwater Point space and how they interact with the car parking there. So you all at the beginning of this said how you use the space predominantly. Well, these are the responses back from those surveys. The majority of people who responded said that they were there at least partly for the Dome Cafe itself, but also very significantly exercise and meeting friends and family gatherings. What this shows is that there is a huge number of reasons why people are using this space, and that's reflected in the way the car parking is used and some of the issues and conflicts that arise between different types of groups using the same space for different reasons. In terms of frequency, this is mostly around how experienced respondents might be with the Deepwater Point parking, the activities on site and the surrounds. So we would expect that people who are there more often have more understanding about where alternative parking might exist, or they might be local and interact with the space every day. This can give us a better idea about how we might go about informing visitors about the various options into the future. So again, time and duration is important. In this case, the time of arrival is key. And you'll see in a couple of slides from now how that relates back to parking on the ground. But you can see there's a very significant peak that occurs all the way from the early morning through to midday before tailing off into the afternoon. And from this, you can also see that the majority of those trips that come to Deepwater Point are there for only an hour or 2. But there is a sizable fraction that are there for longer periods, and that is predominantly associated with boat launching, and the needs of those types of visits are somewhat different than for shorter periods. And I can get into that in a little bit more detail in the future. Okay, this map shows for the wider precinct, and this is all of the areas that we surveyed to look at occupancy and duration for the parking survey counts. And you can see the Deepwater Point car park itself. And then the areas in green are where parking is available unrestricted at any time of day and for any length of period. And then there are restrictions for residents only in those orange components, and a variety of areas where parking is prohibited. That just gives a context for how much parking is out there and where it sits. And that relates directly to the outcomes from the surveys. So we did 4 lots of surveys, 2 in summer and 2 in winter, to see how the parking was used across the area. And in this chart, you can see both the Deepwater Point car park, that's in the dark orange, and the parking across the wider network. And what you can see is essentially Deepwater Point is more attractive. It is fills up earlier and stays full longer. That makes sense. It's closest to the activities. And you can see that the rest of the network starts off relatively empty early in the morning. And then towards midday, it fills up. It gets more and more occupied. And for this peak day, the Boxing Day, which is essentially the busiest day of the year, that network is essentially fully booked. All spaces available are occupied at that peak period. So the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. sort of period, it's completely chockers. It doesn't get quite that full for the 30th of December. So it's still very busy, but it's not that absolute peak day. And in this case, you can see that towards the edges of that network, there are still spaces that remain available all the way through the day, even while Deepwater Point itself is full. Now, if we look at the winter period, you can see that it's different, and actually quite significantly different. We have, in the winter, the Deepwater Point car park fills up earlier. And that is related to the type of activities that are associated with this. And we have a Friday and a Saturday in this data set. And you can see that the way, I think actually it might be a Sunday and a Monday, the weekend periods are different. They fill earlier, they stay full through the day. But on the whole, neither the Deepwater Point car park itself nor the surrounding network really, they're not fully saturated. There's always some spaces available, although they may be difficult to find. Now, Deepwater Point, the way the car parking works, as you know, is a bit unusual because it's differentiated between the car bays on the foreshore side and the trailer length bays on the opposite side. And so if we take that information and we sort of color code it, you can see how people interact with those spaces as it progresses through that morning period, that peak. And in this case, you can see 26th of December, by 7 o'clock in the morning, all of those car parking bays on the foreshore side were full. And they stayed full for the entire day, essentially. Now, the car park, the boat trailer parking is restricted prior to 11 o'clock in the morning during that summer period. And so you can see that as the day progresses, those spaces that are closest to the boat ramp fill up first, and then progressively the rest of that car parking fills up through the day until by about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning in the summer, it's all full. Again, that's somewhat different in winter. You can see 7 o'clock in the morning on the Sunday, it is full by 7 o'clock in the morning. It follows a very similar pattern, but it's important to remember that during the winter period, the rules were different, that there was no restriction for parking in those boat trailer bays. And so we have when we say that those bays are full, they are full, not necessarily of boat trailers, but predominantly of cars. And the next slide, you can see how that works. Same data again, but this is just for those boat trailer car parks. And you can see that period in the morning before 11 a.m., the majority of people using that space in summer are boat trailers. That was particularly true on Boxing Day. And you can see as, you know, on the 30th of December, that day, we had quite a large number of cars that were already parked in there prior to that 11 o'clock changeover period. In winter, there was very little boat trailer parking observed. And so you could see that allowing cars to park in those bays didn't substantially affect how boat trailers use that space, but did provide more car parking close to the activities for that winter period. You can still see it fills up quite a lot. And actually you can see the numbers are higher because we've counted cars and trailers, but you can fit more cars into that space than you can trailers. So there were actually more vehicles parked in the winter period than in the summer. Okay. One of the most important things that we got from asking people about their experiences was that we could ask who they thought were the most important people to get parking. And in this case, we're talking about assuming everyone gets parking, who needs it closest to their destination. And the results are pretty consistent across everybody that disabled parking, parking for seniors, and parking for parents with prams closest to their destination was considered to be the most important use of car parking in that space. And that was independent of whether you identified with any of those groups. After that were these groups. And so when, asking that question, who's next? Who should next get parking? The answer was cafe patrons, the boat trailers for the use of boat launch facilities, and families. And then lowest in priority order were some of these other groups, people exercising, cyclists, and commuters. Now, the people exercising and cyclists has to do with an expectation that exercise is part of that activity. And if you're exercising and you park a little bit further away, then you have more capacity to walk to your destination than perhaps some of these other groups. And commuters last of all. If you're arriving at Deepwater Point to park and then go to work somewhere else, there was very little sympathy for people using those key spaces for that activity. We also asked the question, or we analyzed the data in a slightly different way. And you can see through this, we cut the data up to exclude the group that the respondents self-identified with. So if you were a senior, we removed that data set and we looked at what everyone else thought about seniors and et cetera for the whole thing. And basically from that, you can see, as I said before, that those first three key groups, that the feelings towards those groups' need for parking was independent of whether or not they were in those groups. The next three are slightly different. You can see that the shape of those things changes a little bit. And I think from memory, one of these is slightly wrong, that we end up with a slightly different behavior across those things. But you can see that essentially these outputs are very similar between the two of us. That's good for me because as part of the next part of this, I need to work out how we should best manage and use the space. And what we have from people's responses to the questions was that we have a very consistent view of how that space should be used. And we basically need to see what we can do to make sure that people who need the space the most have the greatest opportunity to use them. So the next stage of this was an interactive map that was put through the Melbourne Talks web portal. And this allowed people to identify where they park and what kind of activities they use. So we could sort of map one-to-one from one to the other. And this is a map that shows all 88 pins and all the commentary attached to that, with people self-describing their activity. And you can see through this, we've segregated this a number of ways based on activity. And you can see, people who want to launch their boat from Deepwater Point, they want to park closest to the boat launch area and predictably in those boat trailer bays. If your destination was the Dome, understandably, where you want to be is right outside the Dome. But depending on what time of day, you can see from the previous results that some of that parking is absolutely full at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And so many people will need to park further away and then walk into the Dome because the parking that's right outside is already full. And that's also true for the exercise, but we're sort of shifting around the other to the foreshore. Parking immediately adjacent to the Dome may not be as important. And in fact, there are a number of people who said, look, I'm happy to park further away. It's easier to find a car park and I'll just walk to wherever I need to be. So this sort of feedback is also important for us, so we can match how the parking works to people's perception of how it should work. And last of all, we've got social gatherings. So we have family picnics and meeting up with friends. And you can see a lot of that is still probably associated with the Dome. Maybe not there for lunch, but the ability to get a coffee while we're meeting up with family and friends, that is a valuable component of that trip. And so there's a catchment of those people who would very much like to park nearby to make that trip easier. And then, the need for space sort of pushes out this, both the destination for the trip and the car parking itself into the wider catchment. But key to that is availability. Again, social gatherings don't tend to start at 6:30 in the morning. So to some extent, people are just taking the parking that is available at the time that they need to use it. So there is down the bottom, there is a little Q&A box. And what I'd like you to do, if you have any questions about either how Deepwater Point works now, or questions you want about parking and management or about future function, write them into the Q&A box. We'll give you a little time to work out what you want to ask, and I'll be available in 15 minutes to go through all of the answers to those questions alongside the lovely people from the city of Melville, and hopefully we can answer any questions you might have.
So we received 9 questions now. So I'm Mick McCarthy. Hi, everyone. What we thought, we've just had a look at those questions and I've identified who within the room is best placed to answer them. And I'll answer the first one, and then I'll have the manager, Kim Brostel, who will manage a couple related to the capacity of the car park area. And then Jacob Martin will go through the rest of them as they're specifically related to his work that he's doing in regards to the developing a parking management plan. So the first one here was from Gail Stewart, and her question is, why was the Dome not required to supply extra parking before being allowed to build there? This was before my time starting here at the city, but I understand that their approval was given based on the availability of public parking near the facility. It was being used prior to them by a kiosk in the area, and it was felt at that time that there was sufficient parking within that area to accommodate the use. And I guess in hindsight, in looking at both the popularity of the area from both the Dome and the increased use from upgrades to the area, that the demand is obviously far exceeding what was projected at that time. which is really why we're here today, to try and work out a parking management plan that will be able to address the issues for all the users and gathering this information to assist in the decision-making process. So I think, Kim, we're going to hand over to you just to answer a couple of questions about the capacity issue.
Hello. Okay, hi, I'm Kimberly. I'm the Manager of Engineering at the City of Melville. So there were two questions on have we looked at expanding the car park. So we have developed a concept design to add a number of bays, and it does go to the west on the change room side of the car park. There are topography issues with the level of the road is a lot higher than the parking area, so it does mean a certain amount of retaining. At this stage, it adds about 30 bays, but it needs to progress onto detailed design. The design will also be reviewed as part of this parking management plan that's being developed. So I'll now pass you on to Jacob for the rest of the questions.
Okay, thank you all. So I'm going to run through the rest of the questions, and so I'll try and do these in the order that they were asked. First question is about the commute to work component and whether or not we got information or validation from our parking occupancy and duration surveys, and whether that matches the self-identified commuters. Realistically, I don't think we got anybody who said that they commute to work in the survey itself. All of the information that we have about commuting is from the occupancy and duration surveys. There is a bit of an issue with that because in terms of the length of time that people stay and how they interact with the space, it can be difficult to differentiate people who are using it as a park and ride and people who are using it for other all-day activities. So things like the boat trailer, which is there all day, makes perfect sense. We can differentiate that. That's probably not a commuter. But your mate who shows up in his ute and arrives at 6:30 in the morning and is out on the boat all day, that's going to look exactly like a commuter vehicle. We also have the need for workers at the dome themselves. They will obviously be parking somewhere, whether that's immediately adjacent or up the road. That will also look like a commuter. So it can be difficult to differentiate all of the different types of all-day uses when we start looking through this data. That said, if when you go back and look at this this presentation, go through all of the information around duration of stay, you can see that there were very few vehicles that were there for more than 4 or 6 hours. So at least on the days where we did a physical survey, we didn't observe an undue number of vehicles doing that. Although it is important to remember that any vehicle that is there for 8 hours takes up the same amount of space as 4 vehicles that are there for 2 hours each. So it is definitely something that we need to consider as we get into the next steps. Stephen Rogers has identified that he thinks that free all-day parking is a problem. And this is, good quality parking management practice is for locations like this. One of the things you want parking to do is to induce turnover. Allowing more people to use the most valuable parking spaces is better for everyone, really. Certainly better to have 4 people all using parking immediately adjacent to their destination than one person sitting there all day and the rest of them have to park 6 blocks away and walk in. So absolutely, as we go through our proposed management regime, one of the things that we need to look at is how do we maximize turnover, but in a way that allows people to do the activities that they want to do on the site. We don't want to create a situation where we're shuffling people off after 30 minutes, but they're there with their families. So we're sort of ruining the experience for them. So parking can be really powerful, but also it can be really destructive if we do it wrong. We can see through the data and through just being there on site, that this is a really popular location. There's any number of reasons for that, I mean, not least of which, the improvements to the facilities make this a very, very nice place to bring your family to just have a picnic. And to some extent, the popularity of a place like that is really difficult to assess in advance. So we want to make it available to all of the people who want to use it, all the activities that want to use it. And so some of the ideas that I'm looking at are just simple things like making it really easy to drop your kids off, drop your gear off, offload your picnic blankets, and then get back in the car and move it, just up the road, so you don't have that long walk distance. Some of those things are just allocating bays in a different way so that we can maximize the utility, make sure that people can do the things that they need to, right outside their destination. And then if they're going to move further away and park for 4 hours as they have a lovely barbecue, then there's the opportunity to do that too. So certainly that's going to be folded into the work that we do next. So Kimberly's already touched on the potential increases in parking supply and some of the constraints. Part of our work is to look at the feasibility of those car parking arrangements and to make sure they match both on a management side and they fully comply with all of the best practice operational and standards requirements. So that work is in train and it will be folded in to our recommendations into the future. Observation from Bruce about timed parking and the interactions between time parking and paid parking. This has been a contentious issue, not just in Melville and not just at Deepwater Point, but everywhere. Paid parking is an extremely powerful tool, and it can be used in a way that is beneficial to all users, but it's difficult to get the balance right sometimes. And one of the mechanisms to do that is to specify a free period, as recommended here. 1 or 2 hours where you can park for free, and then if you want to stay all day, sure, go for it. It'll just cost you a bit of extra money. And the benefit of that is that if you're going to stay for 6 hours, maybe it's not reasonable for you to park and pay for 4 hours of that. You might as well just park up the coast a bit and free that spot up for people who are there for a shorter period of time. So it can be very powerful. Getting the price right is important. Getting the quantum right is important, and the number of spaces available for that use, and really getting that free period is important. You don't want the worst possible feeling, from my perspective, is where you thought you were going to be somewhere for an hour, and it turns out you're going to be an hour and 15 minutes, and you get that angst, that anxiety-inducing feeling. You think, oh, I'm going to overstay my parking, but I'm having a lovely time. We want to avoid that, and there are ways to do that through technology, and there are ways to do that through good quality parking management. Definitely something that we will be looking at. David has asked, how do we resolve the surveys for boat launch and presumably other groups? All of the results that we've shown here are 100% raw. We received 649 survey responses, and we have evaluated them on their own merits rather than trying to assume that we have any sort of statistical understanding of what that means for the population as a whole. Now, from my perspective, what that means is the information that we get, I need to look at in terms of what do people using the boat launch facilities need? What do people who come to the site for the dome, what do they need? How long do they stay? When do they arrive? Same for all of the different user groups. And then I can compile that into something that says, okay, this is what these various user groups desire. This is how they're using the space. How do we facilitate that through parking management? Charles has asked a very common question: how do we stop people from parking on the driveway? important to note that people parking on driveway is already, it already contravenes your rights. So if someone is parking on your driveway or your verge, you are fully entitled to call the rangers. I would take a photo of their license plate, call the rangers, try and get them to come out. Understanding that rangers are very busy people, they're doing a lot of work, but if this is happening consistently, a couple of warnings or a couple of infringements is usually enough to get people to stop doing this thing. Beyond that, it's pretty difficult to administer from the city's perspective, because realistically, it's hard for them to know whether the car parked in your driveway is yours or somebody else's. So to some extent, that needs to be self-policing by the residents. Yep. If I can deal with, there's a few new questions since I started asking these. So I'll do a question from Charles, which is, essentially what you're saying is you're doing all the right things. But from the city's perspective, it's really difficult to administer this. They get shown a couple of times, and any information that you give them gets folded back into the system. So if you say, hey, look, 8 o'clock in the morning every Sunday, somebody's parking in my driveway or parking on my verge, can you come out at 8 o'clock on a Sunday? You've got a much better chance than just some general information that says occasionally somebody does this thing. It's not legal, it's not allowed, but they're going to need to catch someone in the act to do something. Okay, I will go. Oh, okay. So I'll do this question from David about a parking plan for the grass area to the south of the pump station. I can only comment on the sort of utility and cost of these sort of arrangements. One of the issues with all of this, and Kimberly's response from a technical engineering perspective is one. The other one is just the sheer amount of space and cost of car parking. I think generally people, they may not even know. In my experience, and I've done a lot of these jobs, the cost of car parking is somewhere between, at the absolute minimum, $8 grand a bay, more realistically 15, and in complicated locations, upwards of $30,000 to $50,000. So when you look at increasing supply, it can be very difficult to do that in a cost-effective manner. And particularly if you're, in this case, removing something that other people might currently be using for a different purpose, then you come across a whole lot of other issues. I will leave the last one, the discussion about Men's Street, to Mike, because that's outside of my scope for this. But I'll keep an eye on the Q&A and see if there's anything else that comes up.
Thanks for that, Jacob. There's a couple of questions there. One in relation to extension of the car bays further south, and Jacob just identified some of the costs there. The city did look at expanding the current car park further to the west, putting that retaining in. And I think Kimberly might have mentioned that before. And I think that ended up being about $1 million for 30 bays. Was that $500,000? So, that's quite an expensive. So it's in the mid-range that Jacob was referring to there. And obviously, to provide that, and if you combine that with free parking, it's a very expensive exercise to go. So that's why obviously local governments look at, and all parking providers look at trying to offset the costs by applying fees. But obviously in this case, we're looking at coming up with an appropriate and equitable arrangement for parking that encourages that turnover of bays, as well as doesn't impact on the user experience while trying to manage that demand. We have looked at various options, both redesigning the current layout of the car park to improve that, and also have considered extending the car park further to the south. one of the issues around extending it to the south is not just straight the cost, there's also the environmental implications, and you'd have to get approvals from the state government through the DBCA, which would be very difficult to achieve given their current stance on parking elsewhere in the foreshore area. These foreshore areas are highly valued for its environmental and recreational uses. So that is something that would be quite a challenge to get that through the process. And also from the general community that use that area, they would be saying, well, why are you taking up precious foreshore area with car bays? And have we seen some of the data there? Yes, the car parks are full at certain times of the year, but a lot of the times they're not. And during the winter months would be, empty. So, you've got to look at the best use, taking into account, multiple values, not just parking, but also other community values in that decision-making process. And the other one's about City of South Perth foreshore, that they're saying the main streets all day parking with no free period. And I guess that's understandable. That is a high demand area. That's got direct access to the city through the ferry. So obviously those arrangements have been put in place to stop people from, just using that as a car bay and then going elsewhere. I think the City of South Perth supports people who would park there and stay in the local area and spend their money to contribute to the local economy. But obviously for those high demand areas, like the CBD as well, it's all paid parking because that's how they manage demand. If it was free for everyone, then the whole city would be blocked up with people trying to park in there every day, and it wouldn't function properly. So again, we're looking at a similar thing here. We want the car park to operate effectively and to function properly, and to be able to give the most diverse users to that area the opportunity to use that area. Obviously, the upgrades we've made recently in regards to the foreshore area, the boat ramp, new boat ramp there and launching facilities, the children's playground there, the barbecues and pathways. It is a highly valued area, and we need to come up with a balanced way to be able to manage that demand and put in place parking arrangements that are able to achieve the outcomes of having turnover of bays, but also having people to have a good experience when they use that space.
Right, thank you, Jacob and Kimberly and Mick for responding to those questions. Hopefully we have responded in a manner that you think is appropriate. There will be, the city will have a frequently asked questions response on the website. We will post that with this presentation on the city's website. Where to from here? Well, Jacob has the task of developing a draft parking management plan that he will present to the city's project control group, which I'm a member of. We will make some comment on that. We will then present the draft plan to our elected members, and that will probably be in February. And then the plan will be posted on the city's webpage, and we will be inviting community comment on the draft plan in a similar format to what we did before with the, when we started this process. We'll put it on there. You'll have the opportunity to comment. We'll collate those comments. We'll revisit the parking management plan, and we'll give you back feedback on that. So I'd like to thank everyone for participating this afternoon, and thank you for the amount of questions. Very diverse, very interesting. And I would like to ask you if you would like to complete an evaluation survey, which will appear on your screen shortly.